Antonio.
And I'm Jordy.
We're the Data Science Imposters.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Data Science Imposters. My name is Jordy. I'm here with my buddy Antonio, and today we're coming at you live, virtually, but live, from the Tom Foundation Cities Rising Summit. Today we'll be talking about how emerging data scientists can path creative careers and how employers can help them get there. We are joined by three excellent panelists, and I will introduce each of them now. As I introduce them one by one, I will ask them all the same question to get us into the flow of the panel. So I'll introduce our first panelist, Miriam Friedel, Director of Software Engineering at Capital One. Miriam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Miriam, your first question is, what characteristic unique to you has helped you succeed as a data scientist?
So that is a great question, and I'm going to be a little bit of a pain in the neck and give you two answers.
All right.
One, just to start us right off the bat. So number one, I think, is being really willing to dig into challenging problems. An answer that comes up at first, it might seem like the obvious answer, but then as you dig further into the data or dig further into your understanding of the business context, you might find out that actually what you need to know or the critical piece of information is something else. So I think just being really tenacious and being willing to power through it and not give up, I think, is one thing. And I think the second thing is communication skills, being able to talk to people, understand their problems, listen, since that's how you can really drive the most value at data science and machine learning. So I think it's really those two things, being able to power through, dig through, be tenacious, and also being able to communicate and listen. So I'd say those two things.
Thank you, Miriam. That's great. Our second panelist is Carrie Guerrero, Senior Data Scientist at S&P Global. Carrie, thanks for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here.
Carrie, same question to you. What characteristics unique to yourself have helped you succeed as a data scientist?
Yeah, so this is a hard question, I think, because I can think of a million things that are not unique to me that help me to succeed. But I sort of come back to the fact that it is a very hard job. Being a data scientist is a hard job. And there's going to be times where it feels like everything is imploding. And regardless of how carefully you plan or how much and thoughtful you've been, like, there's times where it becomes difficult to see your way out of and to see your way to whatever answer you're looking for. And those moments I have found are sort of the most important ones in defining your career and like defining who you are as a professional. So coming back to like my unique thing is that I found very early on, one of the things that helps me through those situations is I have sort of this internal mantra that I run when everything feels terrible, which is that I just remind myself that I love my job. And regardless of how terrible it is right now, I just say to myself in my head, I love my job. I am lucky to be here. And regardless of anything, like, what I do is awesome. And I have found that bringing it back around to the fact that I am passionate about what I'm doing and like the people that I'm helping, it helps me get through some of the points that are hard. So I don't know if that's a characteristic or like a strange internal tick, but that is what rolls through my head when everything is exploding.
You try to keep that perspective. That's great. Our third and final panelist is Renee Teat, Director of Data Science at Helio Campus. Renee, thanks for joining us.
Sure. So my answer to the same question would be something that's definitely not unique to me, but very similar to what Miriam and Carrie both said, is that wanting to know the answers, that curiosity, that passion for the work, knowing what the connections are between different data points and wanting to understand the business and how things work, that excitement about discovering things and like just understanding the big picture, that's what drives me. And so I would say that curiosity makes me want to be good at my job, and then also makes me find things in the data because I really want to know more and want to know why things are happening. So it makes me dig a little deeper and add that additional value beyond just doing what's in the description of the report or whatever I'm being asked to do.
Sure.
Thank you all. If you listen to Data Science Imposters, you'll realize that we don't have set questions ahead of time. These panelists are brave. They're coming to Jordy and I, and they're saying, okay, give us your best shot. And we have some direction. So with that said, Renee, I want to bring it back to you. A career in data science can go in many directions. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the key steps or decisions you made throughout your career to get you where you are today?
Sure. Well, right out of school, my undergraduate degree was integrated science and technology at JMU, so a very generalist degree that James Madison University offers, and it kind of gave me a base in a lot of different technologies. My focus was manufacturing and engineering, and right out of school, I started a business. So right at the end of my time at JMU, I learned about databases and writing queries, and so I was able to start a business helping local businesses and professors and government subcontractors with database design and website design. And so that was a big choice right off the bat, is like try to start and do my own thing instead of going into a traditional career path. Then eventually I did get into like a normal job. I worked at JMU and at Rosetta Stone as a data analyst, and so that took me from the relational database design into like doing the analysis and understanding those relationships between the data and reporting and things like that. And choosing to stay local here in Harrisonburg, that was a big choice I made, because I could have gone back to where I grew up in the DC area. There's a lot of technology jobs, but I decided to stay in Harrisonburg and still here all these years later. And then I went back to school. So after working for, I think it was 8 years, I went to UVA for a systems engineering master's degree and another generalist program, but that really upped my skills in terms of math, understanding systems and complexity, and kind of launched me on the path to data science from data analysis. So yeah, there's several choices along the way that made my career what it was. I don't think I've ever taken the traditional path.
So that's interesting. It wasn't only choices, but it's also augmenting what you already had, whether it was through your career and then through education. Miriam, I'm going to go to you. And you mentioned about digging into data, digging deeper into data. Can you give us an example of maybe one time where you did that and it led you either to make a decision or it led you in a certain path on a project?
That's a great question. And I'll give the example I love to give. Early on in my data science career, I worked at Elder Research, which is a local data science consultancy here in Charlottesville. And the first project I was on was for a major software company. And we were trying to build a user segmentation model based on how users used the software. So typically when you do something like this, you might think about what industry is this person in, or what is some other demographic, where do they live, what is their age, so on and so forth, level of education. We wanted to do it based on how were people actually clicking through and using this tool, right? What sort of user segmentation or profiles could we understand there? So we start digging into the data, and the customer had said to us, probably there's maybe, 500, maybe 1,000 different commands that users might execute in this tool. So we go into the database and there's over 10 million unique commands. And everyone was like, hold on, what is this, right? And so this was, I think, really the first time I got to experience what I was talking about earlier, the digging into the data, but also connecting it to business understanding, subject matter expertise. And then, once we started getting into it, was like, oh, there's different types of commands. And, when a user interacts with the software, they're not executing all of these things. Some are automated and they run in the background, right? And so it really changed I wouldn't say it changed the direction of the project, but it very quickly got us to a very clear understanding of something that we hadn't had before we dug into the data and asked that question. So I think, that was, I guess, around 6 years ago now. And it's just something that's always stuck with me, in terms of expectations versus reality, and how what is in the data and what you're exploring and understanding can then shape what you go on to do.
And Tony, if I may, so Miriam, just staying with that example. So you find it's 10 million, different variables versus what the customer told you. When you go back to the customer with that information, are they accepting of it, or are they a little bit hesitant to even, they're like, do you know what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure Renee and Carrie could talk about this too, in terms of wait a minute, my intuition, my business intuition is telling me this one thing, and the data is telling me something else, right? And so sometimes that can definitely be challenging to accept, particularly because I think people can sometimes see, oh, data science is a threat or machine learning is going to take away my job, which is, I don't think really true at all. I think it augments it. In this particular case, we had a fantastic partner. And as it turned out, we were able to identify the right subject matter experts within the company, and they were able to say, okay, there's different types of commands. You want to focus on, type 1 commands as opposed to any of the other ones. And then that very narrowly, took us from 10 million to maybe, a few thousand. So it was still more than they thought, but it was a much more reasonable number. And I think in this case, we were also lucky because they were very curious about the result. Like, this is interesting. This isn't what I expected. Tell us more. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't happen.
Interesting.
Carrie, the next question is to you. It's around your career path. And I guess my question here is, when deciding, you've had a couple of roles in the past few years, when deciding, to change roles or to do something different, what were some of the key decisions that you made in your head?
Oh, that's a hard one. So I think that for me in my particular career progression, so I did an undergraduate degree in math, and then I switched to enlist in the United States Marine Corps. So I spent 5 years doing geospatial analysis, which ends up being like a lot of data work and a lot of data management. And from there, I switched into a small company here. I worked for CCRI for a while in Charlottesville. And I think for me, every time I look at a career move, the question that I always come back to is it the right time for me to switch away from the technical, detailed individual contributor role? Or is it the right time for me to switch into trying to manage folks and trying to guide a team and a culture around like getting an overall project? So I think my career choices so far have been, up until this last move to S&P, have been around where can I find technical excellence? Where are the people that have the absolute most technical excellence that I can learn from and that I can grow into before I switch into a more managerial role? So right now I'm a tech lead and I have direct reports. So I think for me it was putting off that move to managing folks as long as possible and just trying to be like a little disciple of the most brilliant people that I could find. So geared towards that. Do I think the people in this company and in this career move are really smart and really open to teaching me and like bringing me on board with what they're working on? Is that a yes or a no? And that has generally guided my decisions. It's just the people on the teams that I'm joining.
That's smart, because now you're learning from your peers and your colleagues.
Yeah.
But now, Carrie, staying with you, now that you're a tech lead, what do you look for when you're picking a new member of your team?
Oh yeah, okay. So I look for two things. I look for someone to be really curious to learn, and really like having good answers to questions around, if I gave you a month and I said you could do whatever you want to, what would you do? And it's really interesting. No, but it's really interesting, the folks who are like, man, I have a list of 18 things that I want to do if I had the time. So I look for that. I look for like already people having a drive internally for their career and like what they want to learn and what they're intellectually curious about. And then I look for people to just be transparent. I think especially as the number of data scientist roles is just exploding in the world, you're looking at candidates that are less traditional, right? They're not all coming out of a math background, or I did a PhD and 18 years of postdoctoral work. And like, you're looking at less traditional candidates. And what matters to me the most there is like, are you the type of a personality who is going to be transparent when you're stuck? Are you going to be like clear with me when you don't know something? Are you going to speak clearly about, I tried this, but I'm really confused? Because it's a scary thing to not know something and like go into a role and have to say, thanks for hiring me. I don't know how to turn on a Linux machine, so you're going to have to start from the beginning with me. And in general, I found that if people are like courageous enough to be transparent about where they're at and really curious and driven to learn, they are good hires. Regardless of their background, those guys are good hires, or girls, guys or gals. But yeah.
So we have a question, and I'll read the question, and then I'll have some thoughts, and then allow you to raise your hand and let me know if you want to chime in as well. The question, and apologies, I'm going to mispronounce names. Uchenna asks, I'm currently enrolled in a master's degree in data science, trying to find the right path to follow as a career path. Someone suggested I create a niche in cloud computing and a whole lot of information to process. My question is, what should be my guiding principles for the path to follow? So my thoughts around this is there's a lot of paths, and you have to sort of ask yourself, what am I passionate about? What makes me excited? What do I do well, right? And what don't I do well? Sometimes it's easier to say, I'm really not going to be a systems admin. I'm really not going to be a data center person, right? There's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of need for that. I'm really not going to be a network engineer. So for me, that makes it a lot easier to say, no, even though it sounds like an interesting job, it's just not who I am, right? I want to do development. I want to do data. I want to touch the code. So for me, it's really like, am I going to be successful, or am I sort of just kind of looking at that role and saying, I could fit it, sort of, right? Miriam, Renee raised her hand. Yes, Renee.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So when I was recording my podcast, it was about becoming a data scientist and all the different paths in. And so there are a lot of different paths. And like Carrie was mentioning, a lot of people are coming from non-traditional backgrounds, if there even is such thing as a traditional background for data science. But I think that what is important to think about is, in what direction do you want to grow? So if the job seems to be giving you opportunities that are taking you closer to the direction you want to go, even if it's not exactly what you want to do right at this moment, if it's taking you in that step, that's a good one. I would also encourage people right out of school not to be afraid of data analyst jobs. If you can get a job as a data analyst, especially on a team with data scientists, so that you can possibly grow into a data science role, it's really hard to find jobs that are data science jobs that are, totally entry level. Usually when a company's hiring a data scientist, it's a big investment and they're looking for somebody with experience. So if you can be in proximity to data scientists, but do a data analyst, it's not wasted time, because just because you're not doing, necessarily machine learning, you're learning the domain in the area that you're going to work in. So, for me, going into higher ed, learning the lingo of the education industry, learning what kinds of data are available, what are the different roles at the university and how they use data, like all that domain knowledge you have to pick up anyway. And being a data analyst, you learn like how to get data, how to summarize data, what data is important, how to build reports, and all those things are valuable as a data scientist as well. So everything I did as a data analyst, I'm still doing as a data scientist. So that's a good stepping point.
Renee, that's a good point, and you mentioned it, and I've said this, either on the podcast we had you on, or on other podcasts we've had, where a data scientist is sort of consumes some of the roles of a data analyst and does more. But one specific question we had is, what is the difference between a data analyst and a data scientist, and how do you see that?
Yeah, this varies a lot based on the company and the part of the country you're in. Some like I've seen job postings in San Francisco that I would consider a data science posting that are called data analysts. So it really differs a lot. But typically, I see data analyst jobs. So I see data science as like a data analyst plus machine learning. It also often means that you're doing end-to-end work, all the way from pulling the data, building the models, and building something that can go into production. So like deploying it and understanding that whole structure. And you're also often like client facing or user facing, which is also usually true of data analysts. So yeah, there's a huge overlap. When I got into data science, the main gap I had to fill was the machine learning part, and all the coding and Python and packages and stuff like that. But yeah, there's definitely a huge overlap there, and it always depends. So you have to read the job descriptions well. And if you're applying for a job, ask what the expectations are and what the direction of growth is, so you can find out more about what is a data analyst or a data scientist at that company.
I do see that, Renee, that sometimes the data science role also has pieces of data engineering, while as the data analyst role may not have those pieces as much, and they'll rely on some of the tools that are already there. Carrie, I'm going to go back to you. You wanted to answer the question about the master's in data science and the career path.
Yeah, so I think everything Renee said is absolutely on point. The only thing that I would add is that, especially when you're in the beginning of your career, I think choosing a particular little like niche to get super, super good at may not always serve you extra well in the long term. And the reason I say that is because like data science changes so much. Like I remember when I started a few years ago, people were just, it's been more than a few years now, it's been like 7 years, oh my goodness. But people are just starting to get involved in like embeddings and like word to vec and like NLP processing, and that it's exploded in the last few years. So I always advise people when they're really looking at a long-term data science career to remember that at the heart of a data science job, your job is to be good at math and computer science. And so like anything you're doing that builds those two skills, right? Anything that either is math, computer science, and the domain that you're working in is honestly the third leg that I think we all stand on. So anything that you're doing that furthers those core skills will always serve you well. Sometimes getting to be an expert at a particular library or a particular technique, or it'll grow old really, really fast. And like being good at math and being good at computer science will never get out of fashion. So that is always my advice. Be more general and just focus on building up your core skills rather than be an expert at one thing in the beginning.
Miriam, the next question is for you, and it's in line with this whole topic, which is, what qualities are most important to you when hiring someone on your team?
That's a great question. And I think it also circles back to what Carrie was just saying. And, I agree with what she and Renee have been talking about, but building out those core skills, math, computer science. I really don't care if you've used a particular Python library or if you're an expert in TensorFlow or if you know some very specific thing. I might care about, do you have skills in Python? But even there, it's more, are you curious? As Carrie said, are you going to be honest when you don't know something? Like for me, it's a huge red flag if I ask somebody a question in an interview and they don't know something. And instead of just saying, I don't know, but here's what I think based on what I do know, I think like anyone who's afraid to say, I don't know, like that's a red flag, because this is it's a wonderful, challenging technical field, but like every day I run across something I don't know and I have to figure it out, right? So being able to be honest, as Carrie said. And then I think also having the ability to push forward when the answer is not immediately obvious or if there's not a clear path forward. Because sometimes, as I talked about earlier, there's a disconnect between what the business thinks and what the data is saying. Or oftentimes I'll run into situations where some executives are like, I am excited, we want to use machine learning, it's the latest hot thing, but then there's not, but then what, right? Like what's the next way to proceed, right? And so having the ability to say, we don't know what the path forward is, but based on what I do know, I can come up with option A, B, and C. Like, let's talk through this. Let's try to forge ahead and figure it out. It's because there's always going to be things we don't know or uncertainty, and so being able to chart that path forward, even if you in the lack of that certainty, I think is an important skill, and I think it's a hard one. I think it's sometimes one that you have to learn and acquire, and that's not as specific as learn this library or learn this skill, right? Of course, the math skills Carrie talked about, the computer science skills, different, as I said, Python, right? All of these things are important. You being able to use a relational database, but I think in some senses the quote unquote softer skills, right? Being honest, being curious, being tenacious, being able to proceed when there's no certainty, I think is something that is a real asset to any team, regardless of background, because there's so many different backgrounds. And that's another wonderful thing about this field, right? We all, Carrie, Renee, and I all come from different backgrounds and different experiences, yet we've all experienced success in this field. So
Miriam, I want to stay with you. I want to ask you this question, and that example you gave of the CEO being excited of machine learning and blah, right? So the question is very simple, but I'm sure there's a lot of, and I want to hear what all of you have to say about it. Why do data science projects fail?
Oh boy. So I can think of two reasons. So one is because there's so much excitement. Like machine learning and data science can be very powerful. They can absolutely have both tangible and intangible value, right? So 100%. So number one, they can fail because they're not connected to a real business need, or because the real business need is something that actually should be solved with like a better database structure, right? Which is not machine learning, right? And so I think one of my favorite quotes is the chief scientist at the Center for Machine Learning, where I work with in Capital One. I was in a meeting with him once, and he said, "Do you think you need machine learning? Because probably you don't. And if you really think you need machine learning, you still probably don't," right? And so I think, it was a little bit tongue in cheek, because obviously as the chief scientist, he's a believer in the power of this technology, but, bringing it back to the business need. I think the second reason I've seen things fail is because there's so much focusing on, we're going to build the model, and we're going to build the right model, and it's going to be great. And we spend so much time iterating on like building the model that we forget about the fact that like, actually, this Python library we're using is dependent on an old version of Python that's not supported. And so when we want to deploy this and like stand up some architecture to have this be a useful tool, we can't actually use this model. And so now what, right? There's so much focus on this narrow piece as opposed to where's the data coming from, where's it going to, how's this going to be used. So I'd say that in my experience, those are the two main things. One is a lack of connection to a solid business reason to do this. And number two is too much focus on the model and not enough focus on everything else, which is really where the magic happens, in my opinion.
Carrie, you're shaking your head over there.
Oh yeah, I have a lot to say about this subject. So I think like snowballing right off of what Miriam's talking about, what happens is that machine learning fails when it comes to the take it to production step. And you have an excellent answer. You have the perfect answer, but now you have to get it integrated into the systems as they exist in your organization today. And that is really hard. That is really hard because the infrastructure that you need to support like machine learning solutions is oftentimes very, very different than what is classically supported throughout your organization. So I would say do not underestimate thinking through, even from the beginning, if I solve this, how am I going to deploy it within my organization? How am I going to make this repeatable and accessible to everyone? Because I have seen really beautiful and elegant solutions just flop, not because they're bad, but just because there wasn't a clear path to production. And then the other thing that I'll say around this that I experienced in the Marine Corps, actually, that has guided me through the entirety of my career, is that you can be the absolute smartest person in the room, and you can have the perfect solution to the problem. This will give the whole world peace. If you can't explain it in a way that the absolute least technical person in the room can totally be on board with, it doesn't matter. And this smacked me in the face a ton of times in the Marine Corps, because I'd be like, guys, I found this awesome thing. And nobody cared if I couldn't bring it back down to a level that they could understand and then trust. Because sometimes it's hard to trust. Here's this really smart person using a lot of words I don't understand. She says she has the answer, but I don't trust it because I do not understand what she's talking about. So taking it to production, super hard. And getting people to understand and trust what you're telling them is also a hard task.
Those are some great answers. And I'm going to get back to the take it to production. But Renee, why do projects fail?
That's what my talk is about later today. So I have a flash talk about presenting data science results, right? And so that really is key. And spoiler alert, it's not just about the actual presentation at the end. It's about getting that buy-in and understanding at the very beginning. So like what Miriam was talking about with solving a real business problem. So making sure that you understand what's actually being asked. Like, it might not be what you were asked to do. Well, what problem are they trying to solve? And kind of acting as a consultant to figure out, well, what is the best analysis to get us there and to get us closer to an answer, rather than just doing what they asked and then presenting it and finding out later that's not really what they wanted. So communication throughout the whole project is really important. Giving it that business context. So talking about projects that fail, a lot of times it's because you did the wrong project. It could also be because you lost the end user throughout, like you didn't continuously get that buy-in from them, give them the insights. And so by the end, it's like, okay, what is this that you went and did? So that continuous communication is important. And then a lot of times what I found when I've delivered the results of machine learning models, it's not the actual model or like the scores that come from it that are the key part. It's that the feature importance and what it means for the business. And so a lot of times in the end, like productionizing the model and generating those scores might not be where you need to go next. Sometimes it is, if that's, you know, the system you're designing. But a lot of times it's doing the analysis and exploration and being able to explain it in a way that those non-technical people can understand what it means to them and what business decisions can we make because of this? What did we learn because of this exploration? So the exploratory data analysis and all that is really important. And also tying into what both of the other panelists said, over optimizing can also be a problem if you're trying to tweak it and get a slightly better model, but you're missing the big picture, or sometimes like the slight improvements in the model are kind of a waste of time, because in the end, that's not where the value is in having done the experiment. So that all kind of ties together with just communication, understanding the business context, and providing those results in context.
Renee, that's great. And one of the questions that I had on here, which I think a lot of people have if you're in a smaller organization or organization that's traditionally not data science or technology focused, is that you say, hey, I want to be a data scientist, right? And right now, maybe I'm in a business analyst or data analyst role. And it's how do I get my organization that maybe doesn't have a path for data science there, right? Like, how do I get them to buy in? And it's really what you said about the failing in data science projects, right? It's about that communication. It's about getting buy-in at the least technical level, right? And getting people to see, okay, maybe this is something that we can use going forward. But I am going to go to the audience. We have a couple of questions which I think are relevant. So I'll read them out loud. I'll give a couple of snippets, and then just raise your hand if you want to add anything. Sandeep's question is, data science jobs are so hot now that there are students training right from their bachelor's degree. What do you think about people entering into the field from another domain role? Where in the hierarchy can they start? How do you see, quote unquote, older people in getting into your teams? Right. So I'm going to click on answer live. So Sandeep, I think that there's a couple of things that you have to consider here is if you've been in another industry, right? If you've been in a certain industry, you have that domain knowledge, and that domain knowledge that you've acquired over, you know, your career is really important for data science, right? Because there's still a lot of aspects to understanding the knowledge management piece, right? Understanding what the data means, understanding how it has impact to a business. And so when I think about that, I think about, okay, first of all, that domain piece, but also what is it that you want to do? You know, do you want to be a data analyst, a business analyst, or do you want to be something more technical? And I agree with Renee's sentiment on, hey, if there's a role where you can be a business data analyst or transition into a data scientist, that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and I can answer this as well. So I took my own career path, you know, kind of up to the point where I became a data scientist, but then how did I make that jump from data analyst to data scientist? And I was not at the beginning in my career, right? And I was in another industry. So one aspect of it is, and in the job you're in, doing some experimentation, you know, saying, hey, first of all, if you're in a job, a company where there's no data scientists, a lot of times they hear of this thing called data science and they're interested in it. And so you can pitch it and they're really excited for you to do it, but they don't really understand what it means. But you can always do kind of a demo project. Say, okay, I have access to our data. Let me try to present something, make a simple model and show the possibilities of what we can do. The hardest thing for me in that role was that the job I was supposed to be doing, the data analyst job, took up so much time that even though the company was like verbally supportive of doing the data science project, it was hard to actually make the time to do that learning on the job. So sometimes you have to leave a job in order to get the opportunities you want. But in terms of transitioning into the data science career path later in your career, a lot of times what you bring is that, like you said, the domain knowledge is really important. So becoming a data scientist in a domain where you have that core knowledge is really valuable to teams where they might be hiring a bunch of data scientists that have never worked in the industry and they need someone on the team with the industry knowledge. Also, your depth of experience. So if you've come from, for example, a software engineering background, and you can contribute that to your team where you have a bunch of data scientists that have been data analysts that really need help, engineering their program or deploying their model, having that engineering background could help. Or if you have a heavy statistics background, for example, from academic research or something, you could bring that to a team. So being able to understand what you can offer to a team, even if you're newer on the machine learning piece, what are the other pieces where you have that depth of experience and you've seen things going wrong and you've debugged them before and you've done that troubleshooting. That experiences can be really valuable, especially to data science teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you have to think about your career and what you've done at a higher level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you've done sales of widgets, right? Like maybe take out the widgets part and think about sales more holistically, right? And then when you think about it like that, then the opportunities are much greater than just thinking about this specific or maybe more narrow piece. Carrie or Miriam, is there anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I would just say that if you're farther along in your career and you feel like you don't have the technical skills to enter into this team in a senior role, don't be afraid to take a junior role and live in that setting for a year, because what I have found with people that I've brought on board actually is that very quickly they can get spun up on the technical stuff and it becomes immediately apparent that the depth of professional experience that an older candidate has that they bring to the team is immensely valuable. And it's a very quick thing to move from you are at an entry level position to recognize for being a more senior contributor and then moving up through the organization. So I wouldn't shy away from taking a junior role in a team full of people that you think are really going to be supportive of your picking up whatever technical skills you don't have.
Carrie, I wanted to ask you one question. It's in reference to something you said earlier. And you said sometimes failure happens when data scientists, and these are my words, I'm rephrasing it here. Data scientists are kind of doing what they're told instead of interpreting what the business needs are. I think Miriam touched on that as well. What advice would you give a young data scientist in that situation where they may be in front of someone who isn't as technical, but is their supervisor, and you have to tell them your opinions on the direction where the project needs to go?
That was a question for me?
It was for all of you, but
okay. Yeah, I think in terms of understanding the requirements, making sure that you're speaking up if it's not clear and having conversations around it. So not just taking some requirements document and going off and disappearing until the deadline, but making sure that you've had conversations about understanding why this analysis is being done, what is the business context, understanding what will be done with your end result. That helps you understand, are you delivering a dashboard? Are you delivering some scores? Are you delivering a production system that needs to run every week, some model that is going to be productionized? So understanding kind of the origin of it, like why is this being asked, and then the end result, what is it they want in the end, or how can I best deliver? And you can consult in that. I mean, you're the expert a lot of times, not necessarily in the domain or the business need, but in what different types of analysis can be valuable for getting to that answer. So don't be afraid to speak up and ask questions and offer suggestions, and that you add value to they'll see more value in you and your contributions to the company if you're not just, going off and being like a computer and coming back with some numbers, but you're consulting and offering that added value.
I'm going to chime in here with the question from the audience, and it's sort of related, but sometimes I like tangents. So Kip asks, thank you for sharing. Besides Kaggle, can anyone recommend a way to practice and get feedback on presenting a complex analysis effectively? Miriam, I'm going to go to you on this one, but I just wanted to give Kip, some of my thoughts. Kip, first of all, you should listen to Data Science Imposters. We talk about all topics. And no, seriously, like listen to podcasts, listen to information, because you're going to get a lot of different voices, a lot of different ideas that maybe you hadn't thought about, right? And sometimes they come out of nowhere. Kaggle is great for practicing machine learning, right? Neural networks and things like that. But the thing about technology is that, and data science, is that there's so many open source tools. There's so much you can do by just taking a project or something you're passionate about and expanding on that. And just learning from it. And there's so many free resources that it's hard when we interview or see someone who says, yeah, I'm interested in machine learning. We say, what have you done? Say, well, nothing. Well, why not, right? Like there's so many things you can do, whether it's learning online using Coursera, Andrew Ng's course, or any of the other free resources, or just doing something yourself. So don't be afraid. Work on a project that you love, whether it's outside of work or in work, and then showcase that and use technologies you care about. Miriam, I'm going to hand it over to you to see what your thoughts are on.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. And I think specifically on the piece about communicating, because I 100% agree with what Carrie said, that if you might be the smartest, most brilliant person and can solve everything, but if you can't explain it to the least technical person, right, it's not going to work. So I 100% agree with that. And I think in terms of getting there, it's, remembering, like always connecting to the why, like, why am I doing this? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Going to meetups and presenting at meetups. I know we have a few local ones in Charlottesville, where now they're obviously remote, so it's a little different, but practicing being able to give talks, because giving talks and presenting and being able to explain these things is definitely a skill, and it takes practice. Just like any other skill, we practice math and we practice writing code and we practice, learning and understanding about neural networks or whatever, but giving talks or writing also requires practice. And people who used to work for me know that one of my favorite comments about slides is that has too many words on it. Right? Like keeping, because we all have a tendency to want to just, put all this information. I'm guilty of this too, but just particularly if you're giving a presentation and you're trying to talk about something really complex, like breaking it down and not just having like a wall of text, because I think that can sometimes make it hard for people to simultaneously, because they're trying to read the text and also listen to you. So I think, just remembering also that, like, when you talk about this stuff, particularly if it's something that you love or something you've spent a lot of time doing, you're the expert. You probably know more about it than anyone in the audience. The exception might be if you're giving an academic talk. I remember, in my years getting my PhD, right? Like you go to a lot of talks and there's a lot of people in the audience who might know more than you, but in a business context, that's often not the case. And so just knowing that you probably know more about the particular technical things and the people in your audience. And I think another thing too, with respect to that, is just pausing often, asking, like, does that make sense? Are there any questions? Like really trying to connect and engage with your audience, because you can usually tell if people are completely lost or if they're really following what you're saying.
And I agree with that idea of doing a project on something you're passionate about, because if you take some project that's in a domain you're not interested in or you don't know much about, you won't understand that context and how to explain it. But if it's something that you personally love, like you love whales, so find a data set that has to do with whales and do some analysis on it and see if you can better understand whales and increase your understanding. And you have maybe you've done some research in this area, but like any topic, pick something that's interesting to you and that you're passionate about, because you will overcome those technical issues to get to the answer because you're interested in it, and then you'll be better able to explain it. Another good way to do that, if you can't get to a meetup and present, is just record yourself for YouTube or write a blog post. So you don't have to have an audience at the time. Writing blogs also helps you keep track of your learning and how you grew over time and be able to go back and reference that. So I just wanted to add, you don't have to have a formal presentation opportunity to do it yourself.
Join us for a podcast. We're always happy to have people on. Michael Hang has a question about auto ML and whether data science is headed into using like auto machine learning packages. And I'll just add here that what Miriam, Renee, and Carrie have all said is why these things are even more important, right? As we continue to automate, whether it's data prep and cleaning and all of the processes of machine learning and data science, someone still needs to explain that. And someone needs to explain what this package did. How did it work? How do we get the results? So you can't just like, take some data and throw it into a bucket and like get an outcome and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and use this. You won't get the backing, like Carrie said, right? You won't get the backing. You won't be able to explain it. But there is certainly areas where automation are going to continue to drive data science, right? And I think that these packages are going to go a long way. Carrie, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like from your client's perspective, whether you're like using a complicated and carefully curated neural network to give people results, or you're using like a library that's just going to like build a neural network out of like a genetic algorithm situation, regardless of where it's coming from, it's going to seem equally mysterious to your client. They're not going to understand the difference at all. You're going to say, I hand curated you this perfect neural network that solves everything versus a genetic algorithm made it. They don't care. So like, I don't think it changes very much for us. And I am always so very, very cautious to ever use a library or to use results that are coming out of something that I do not carefully understand. So if anything, I think it puts more of an onus on us to be sure that as we're using these new tools, these new libraries and these exciting things, that we're not losing track of really knowing what is going on. Because sometimes you get bad results from people just like trusting the library. And you're like, well, that's great. Like you have to know that the library is absolutely appropriate for the data that you have at hand. So it puts more on us to be better educated and better communicators. I don't think maybe it makes our job more interesting actually, but I don't know that it makes it any easier.
I agree with what Carrie's saying. And I also want to chime in that from my standpoint, being at Capital One, which is a highly regulated financial institution, which is a consumer, I'm totally happy about that, right? But if I'm building a model, let's say, for example, to approve or deny you a credit card with Capital One, and if I deny you, I need to be able to explain why. And so if as a data scientist, I just take this model and throw it into a tool or use a library, as Carrie said, I don't understand why, right? That's also not going to help you because then you don't know why you were denied, why you were denied a credit card, right? So everything has to be highly explainable. And so, that, and certainly we're not the only business for where this is true. And so I think, that as Carrie said, it does put an onus on us to be careful and to make sure that what we're generating really checks the appropriate boxes and is clear and can provide the information we need, whether it's to a customer who's being denied a credit card or to another client we're doing a project for.
I want to chime in. I want to make sure that we have been addressing a lot of items, but I want to make sure that the last bit here is how can employers help data scientists carve creative careers? So Carrie, I'm going to go to you. A little role play here. You're CTO for the day.
Oh man, not a job I want.
What culture are you building in your environment to make a data scientist successful?
Okay, so we've talked a lot about hiring and like hiring from a creative background. I have seen that it is an unfortunate trap that organizations will fall into, which is that at interview time, the team and the department and the organization paints a picture, which is like your job at interview time, of who the candidate is and what their capabilities are. And I think the trap that organizations can fall into is not having good like transparency and acceptance and support for how much someone will change over the course of a year or 2 years in a data science position, especially if they're coming from a diverse sort of a background. That's not like a normal thing that you came out of a PhD program in math. Congratulations. So I think that part of what I would want to try to build is a culture where we're really good at seeing people for what they are in the given moment and able to let people grow out of what they were when they started an organization. And I see organizations not do super well with this, which is I think why we have folks jump jobs so frequently. They're like, well, I've been here for 2 years and then I'm still being treated like I was when I joined 2 years ago. And that's super unfortunate because you brought in this creative and curious and like transparent individual and they've grown so much and you haven't been paying like enough attention and you haven't been supporting their internal growth enough to make them feel like they can stay here for more than just a couple years. So around maintaining diverse candidates, that would be what I tried to focus on.
Renee, can I would like to hear your answer on that. Your CTO for the day. What changes are you making in culture to make a data scientist successful?
Yeah, I have a very similar answer. Just, reflecting what Carrie just said is that giving your people room to grow. So that involves resources, that involves building a team that has a bunch of different perspectives so people can hear and interact with other data scientists, and not letting them get stuck in what they're originally doing. Like she's right, that's really important and something that happens frequently is the organization sees you being really good at what you're doing and doesn't necessarily see how you can grow. And so when you start hearing your employees saying things like, your company is not getting as much out of me as I can give. I can do more, like give me opportunities, give me resources, give that to them. Another trap people fall into is hiring a data scientist before your company's ready for it or without the infrastructure for that. So if you are at a point where you don't have a solid data warehouse where that data scientist can easily access lots of data that's already in a form that's usable, maybe you need data engineers first. Or if you think data science is magic and you don't really know what they're going to do, but you're just hiring them so you can say you have a data scientist, that's not necessarily setting them up for success. So I would say, making sure you have everything in place that a data scientist will need to be successful before you hire them, and then giving them room to grow and resources and providing those opportunities for them to really shine. Because a lot of data scientists, we're, creative and excited people that are constantly learning. We don't want to get stagnant. And so I think the worst thing you can do is create an environment where somebody feels stifled or like they're not growing.
Yeah. Miriam, going to you, your CTO for the day.
Like Carrie, I'm not sure if that's a job I want. But I think two things. Love the answers from my co-panelists. I think the first thing is enabling a culture of collaboration, right? Like it's not me above everyone else. Like when we work together and bring those diverse perspectives, giving our teams room to grow and work together, we're going to be more successful. But I think also, I don't know if this is a corollary to that, but enabling people to feel like it's okay to fail. And what I mean by that specifically in this case, I think in life where, we need to give ourselves some grace to fail sometimes, but I have this great idea for a product. I'm going to build it and my users are going to love it and it's going to be awesome. Hooray. And then you actually, you build it or you talk to your users and you find out like, actually, they don't need this product. They need something totally different, or this isn't providing the value we think, or, this really isn't panning out, and having the ability to say like, you know what, we did the best we could with the information we have, but we need to stop doing this now. We need to take our learnings from this and move on to something else that's going to be more valuable, right? And being able to do that quickly and thoughtfully, right? It's definitely hard, but the ability to say, you know what, we tried our best, but this thing isn't working and we need to pivot to something else because we've gained new information. And so we have to adjust our strategy. And I think that that's really important as well. I think, you know, I've fallen into this trap, right? I think as a group of people, we love to build things, right? We love these technical problems. You know, as Carrie said, like, I love my job. It's such an interesting job. And sometimes, you know, I've fallen into this trap. We get kind of attached to what we build and, you know, and realizing like, maybe this isn't the right thing, or we built something cool, but we have to put it away. Like, that's really okay. And you can still progress forward, even while leaving things behind.
That's great. And I think we're getting to the time here, and Antonio may chime in here at the end, but I want to ask one final question to all of you. This has been great. And this question, I think it's a bit of a softball. It's one of those things that's helped, I think, everyone in their careers. I know it's helped mine, but have mentorship or being a mentor or being mentored, has that helped and advanced your career in any way? And would you advise someone to get it or do it? Miriam, let's start with you.
30 seconds or less.
Okay. So actually earlier in my career, I would have loved mentors coming out of academia, right? When you have a PhD, it's like, you're going to be a professor and go do that, right? And so I didn't have, you know, I kind of had to find my career path myself. And lately I've actually gotten a lot of requests for me to be a mentor, which is very humbling. But I love to do it because I felt like I so desperately needed that earlier in my career, just someone to be a guide for me. So I'm happy, you know, obviously within the limits of my own, you know, time and ability, I'm happy to do that. I think it's so valuable for others.
Carrie?
Oh yeah. So I don't know if I've ever participated in like a formal mentorship, but one of the things that was amazing for me very early on my shift from like military to data science is that I got to work with someone who was so very open to listening to whatever crazy ideas I had and talking them through with me really carefully and thoughtfully and like non-judgmentally. And that was so critical to like my whole internal dialogue of like my whole internal image of how I think about translating the real world into like a machine readable universe is largely based on the fact that this one person was willing to like sit with me and talk me through intuitively what's happening. So that it's key to why I am where I am today.
Renee?
Yeah, and I would say really with mentorship, don't feel like you have to have a formal mentorship relationship. Like you don't have to have a mentor that you meet with a certain number of times and have for 30 minutes a month or something. Create your own mentors by finding people that are in the career trajectory you want to go in and just like following them. Follow them on social media, see what things they write about and they're interested about. Find people in your company that are, you know, have grown in the direction that you want to grow within the company and just talk to them. You know, it could be informal chats, it could be just asking a question. It doesn't have to be a formal setup. And also make sure you don't mix up mentoring with tutoring. So some people ask for mentorship and then they get in there and they're asking for help with very particular problems. Mentorship is more big picture guidance of where you want to go with your career or talking about ideas and just throwing stuff out there. Whereas tutoring, you know, you can get specific either paid help or you can find people that want to teach that are teaching particular topics and find them. So make sure you know the difference. But yeah, find your own mentors.
That's great. On behalf of Antonio, I would like to thank you all for being on this panel. It's been a great conversation. But before we go, I just want to introduce the marketing manager for the Tauntaun Foundation, Chelsea Woodfolk, who'd like to come on and say a few words before we end.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise today. This was such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And thank you to everyone in attendance today for joining us. This event is part of a full week of programs focused on data and machine learning at the ongoing Cities Rising Summit. Today and tomorrow, we have 2 full days of flash talks and panel conversations, and we encourage you to attend and share the opportunity with your friends and colleagues. Today's program was brought to you by S&P Global, whom we thank for their support and collaboration. All Cities Rising events are pay what you can thanks to our sponsors and the support of community members like you all. So if you enjoyed today's program, we invite you to become a contributing member of the foundation. And with that, thank you all again and see you very soon.